Hello and welcome to the very first episode of That's Just Wild with me, Steve Backshall.
And me, Lizzie Daly.
And me, Sarah Roberts.
The podcast all about nature, wildlife, and how I once had a parasitic maggot emerge from the head of its host in the palm of my hand.
That's just a Saturday night for Steve.
Every week we're going to sit down and share some bizarre and brilliant animal fact bombs and tell some self-indulgent anecdotes about our adventures.
Plus, we'll be bringing you a Q&A episode every Friday where we tackle your equally bizarre and brilliant questions about the natural world. So send them along to questions@that'sjustwild.com.
Now, this week it's all about freezing because I have just got back from an expedition to the Arctic, and I know it's somewhere that both of you know very well too. So I want to unpack everything about Arctic animals, about their biology, and about our adventures there as well.
I was going to say, you look like you've been in the Bahamas. You've got a lovely colour on you.
Seriously, I fried. It's blue skies and sunshine. You've got this big reflective mirror of the snow and the ice that you're out on all day long. I burnt to a crisp.
Didn't you get snow blindness as well?
I did, yes. So it kind of represents by having, first of all, a sort of non-stop itching sensation in the eye, and then it starts to get really like nasty hay fever that doesn't stop. And I've had that for a couple of weeks now. It's no fun. But I think it's really intriguing to think about the animals that manage to survive in that extraordinarily extreme habitat and how they do it. You know, all of the technology that I had at my disposal, and it is, you know, your life is hanging in the balance every single second. But there are animals that manage to survive in that environment through their entire lives, and for it not to be extreme to them, in fact, for them to require those exact things.
Yeah, and it covers kind of all levels of you know, physicalities, physiology, biology. You see it across the animal kingdom. But yeah, let's talk about some of those animal adaptations. So some of the more obvious ones: extra hair. Something like polar bears and Arctic fox have an incredibly dense hair. And obviously when we think of dealing with freezing conditions, obviously our minds go to Arctic, polar, Antarctic regions. But I'm always amazed at like the density of furs of otters. And actually some of my coldest days, you talk about that, I guess, perception of what cold is, have been on the west coast in Vancouver when it's like howling winds and storms and there's just like sea otters floating about with the densest fur of any marine animal on the planet.
Well, about the hair, though, it's not just that it's really thick. Isn't it, in a way, kind of waterproof as well for a lot of these animals?
Yeah.
To a certain extent. So if you're talking about sea otters, there is a degree to which it repels water. But what's much more important is that the underfur is so dense, 100,000 hairs per square centimetre, that the air is not released. So the air is held close to the skin, it's warmed up by the skin. And this is exactly what our dry suits do, is they hold a layer of air close to our bodies. That warms up from your body heat and that becomes your insulation.
And that's why you get the sea otters aerating their fur.
Is that what they're doing?
Yeah, have you seen it? They're not just like rubbing their bodies.
I just
for
thought
a
they were
laugh.
being cute.
They're just aerating that kind of underfur, which is so important for insulation.
For anyone who is just listening to this as a podcast, Lizzie is right now soaping herself up like she's in the shower.
That's not how I wash, I just want to say, by the way. But then you've got there's the more extreme examples, which of course you hear about, like the wood frogs that use antifreeze, which is always very interesting. It's this combination of glucose and urea that freezes like 70%
Hang
of
on
water.
a minute. So sugar and, is that pee or
Urea.
poo? Yeah, it's just like all the excess yuckiness from the body, right? It must
It's
smell
not
great.
urine. It's not
No,
urine.
urea, though, it's the stuff your kidney takes out, isn't it? Am I right in thinking it is? It's the wasty bits. Do they smell funny?
This is inside the cells, though, right? So we're not talking about it kind of like their body becoming encased in it. It's each individual cell being filled with particular cryoprotectants or antifreezes, so that, because the problem is if the liquids within a cell freeze, then effectively you're forming shards of ice inside the bits of your body that are doing all the hard work, and they'll splinter and they'll shatter. And what you want to try and do is prevent that freezing. So animals that are living below freezing point need to fill their cells with things like glycerol.
Yeah, exactly. And they're able to survive and still keep their internal organs basically still intact. So it's a certain amount of that kind of water in their bodies that actually freezes, which is just incredible.
Why are the wood frogs living somewhere so cold?
Because in the spring and the summer, it has loads and loads available to them in terms of food and not that many predators. It's a great environment. And so they've just developed a way of
Better
managing to go into a kind of stasis through
Yeah.
the winter.
Yeah.
Wow.
You guys must have some extreme examples of adaptations in the cold.
Yeah, lots and lots. I mean, polar bears are so well adapted to the cold that even the most rudimentary minor increases in temperature, and that can be in their activity or in the environment around them, will cause them to superheat incredibly quickly. So a polar bear, you'll mostly see them, if they're moving at all, ambling along at this incredibly slow pace, much slower than a human being would walk. And if they break into an even faster walk, they start to superheat so quickly that it can be dangerous to them because they have blubber like a whale or a dolphin does, and they have this incredibly thick, dense fur over the top of it. And in actual fact, a lot of the time, they have, even in sub-zero temperatures, got to be careful not to overheat. So sometimes you'll see them sitting in this incredible position, like in places like Churchill, where they're kind of sitting in this meditative pose like this, exposing their armpits so that all the heat can leave them. And if they were to try a chase of a potential prey animal for longer than a few strides, it's going to be dangerous to them. It's one of the reasons why they tend to go for big animals and focus on just eating the fat, is because going for something like a bird, the chase of the bird is going to require more energy than they're going to get from eating it.
Yeah. It's interesting you talk about, I guess, diet and prey availability and how that's changing, because more now than ever, I'm seeing videos of brilliant clips of polar bears hunting belugas off of rocks, which of course is a part of their natural diet. But the reindeer in Svalbard, have you seen those clips? And you talk about overheating. It's the most extraordinary behaviour where they're going on full hunts, chasing down these reindeer, sometimes pushing them off cliffs. And it's a behaviour that's passed on to their young as well. And so certain polar bears have adapted and evolved to kind of predominantly eat reindeer as opposed to, their normal diet, if you like, of seals.
Having said that, usually polar bears won't do things like eat birds.
Mm.
In Svalbard, exactly where you're talking about, the coolest thing that I saw with polar bears was watching a female bear swimming along the bottom of a bird cliff, an almost vertical cliff covered with nesting birds and their eggs. And this polar bear climbed onto a vertiginous piece of rock and started climbing like a human climber would do. It's almost vertical, using her claws, almost like crampons and ice axes. She went up through this icy couloir that even if I had all of my best climbing equipment, I would have found tough. And to see a bear that probably weighs 300, 400 kilos doing that was incredible. And she was doing it because at that particular period of her life, she was desperate. She needed a feed, and then just went along the ledges, just eating all the eggs and the chicks. But the amount of energy she expended in that climb would have meant that, it's right on a knife edge. And life for a lot of Arctic animals is, they have a life where they are so dependent on one food source happening at a critical part of their year. And if they don't get it, then things turn bad really quickly.
Yeah.
The knife edge for polar bears, as you said, it's getting warmer in the Arctic, as we know. So a lot of polar bears right now are making a decision whether or not to go further north where the sea ice is thicker, but it's harder to catch their prey, or take the risk and come a little bit further south. But as you said, they risk overheating. It's then a case of there's more food available to forage, though, because you've got human life and we have dead whale carcasses and reindeer and other bits and pieces that the bears can hunt on. Dr. Evan Richardson is a bear biologist, and he's out looking for his polar bears in an area
Where's he based?
It's in the Northwest Passage.
Great.
So he's out there looking for polar bears in an area where they haven't checked on that particular population recently. And they're in a helicopter because obviously looking for polar bears, that's the best way to travel, nice and safe, away from their big sharp claws. And as they're flying along, they see a kind of messy looking small polar bear traveling along the sea ice, and they're like, oh, it's kind of mucky looking, that polar bear. And then behind it they see a brown fuzzy looking bear chasing after it. And they wanted to dart it and investigate, but they couldn't because the weather wasn't great. So then instead they had to wait until 2014 to go back, and they found the same polar bear again that was kind of like a off-white colour. And they darted her, they went down, and they found 3 brown cubs. So they happened to find a Grolar Bear. Have you heard of Grolar Bears?
I've heard of this, but I thought it was quite rare. I didn't realise it was actually
Super rare.
Huh.
So we actually only know of 8 in existence, and then he found 4 all in one just there. So the mum was a first generation Grolar Bear. So a Grolar Bear is when it's a male grizzly bear that mates with a polar bear, and a Pizzly Bear is when it's a male polar bear that mates with the grizzly bear female. And so, they darted it. They found out that all the cubs were second generation Grolar Bears. And this has sort of happened because you've got the grizzly bears who, where it's too hot, they're now moving north. And we're seeing populations, especially around this particular area, where there's loads of male, just particularly male grizzly bears lurking around. And then you've got obviously some of these smaller female polar bears that are in the same region. But again, there's only 8 that we know about. There's been a whole study with a team of scientists from Environment and Climate Change Canada and San Diego Zoo who have literally gone through all of the known fur samples and everything that we have of grizzlies and of polar bears. And there's still only 8 that we know of. One of those 8, though, actually came from 50,000 years ago and was found in Ireland.
what?
That's really interesting.
Ta-da! Yeah, I know.
The whole thing is quite intriguing from an evolutionary perspective
Yeah.
because polar bears are a new species. They've not been around for a very long time. They're probably shut off. It was a population of brown bears that would have been shut off from other brown bears by a glaciation event or something just a couple of 100,000 years ago. So really, really new in evolutionary time. So they're still very closely related. And that fact that they can not only mate, but mate and have viable offspring, it kind of proves it.
It's interesting though, because although they share that common ancestor, at the same time, they're completely
so different.
separate. With polar bears being strictly carnivorous, even though they're adaptable in what they eat, and then completely the opposite for the grizzlies. They're far
Omnivores.
more omnivores. And it does make me think, I wonder what would do better if it was a Grolar or a Pizzly, or vice versa.
Well, that's it. When you actually look at the picture of them, because obviously the polar bears have transparent fur. It's not even
Yeah.
white, is it?
Yeah.
It's completely transparent. Whereas these Grolar bears are really pretty shade of kind of beige. They look like a really furry beige grizzly bear that's a little bit more hench. But again, they're not really best adapted for the frozen temperatures because their fur's still not exactly polar bear fur. But then again, they're probably going to be too hot to be in the rainforests, where the temperate rainforests where the grizzly bears are. So they're in this halfway house at the moment. Maybe we'll see more of them. But the fact that there's a second generation there sort of proves that they are adaptable. They are able to survive. It's possible. Maybe that's the future of polar bears.
It kind of seems like the hybrids that we know of, and not all have been uniform in colour. Some of them have been like a white polar bear with brown blotches.
Yep.
They have been bears that might make it in a sort of more temperate habitat, but are much less likely to do well in a pure polar bear location. I mean, it's kind of this overwhelming thing about the polar bear. You've got a white bear in a white world. It's the most perfect camouflage ever. You can look out to an ice floe and you can look for miles and there can be a polar bear like 100 meters away and you can't see it because it's white surrounded by snow. All you have to do is put one tiny little blotch of brown on that bear and it stands out like a sore thumb.
Yeah.
And there are other things as well. The length of the claws is different on the hybrids. It's not quite perfectly suited to that Arctic environment. Like you said, they're not quite as well insulated. So what's most likely is that those that have hybridized and moved into a polar bear habitat are not going to survive and are going to die out. But the ones that start to drift south more into brown bear land are going to pass on their genetics.
Yeah. If anything, it very much feels like more of a symptom of changing environments than hybridization that may actually go on to flourish. I don't know. It's a really interesting area of research, and I think maybe we'll see more as these environments continue to change. But I don't know if I'd want to. I don't know if it's I want to see it. I'm not sure if that would be something I'd
I would argue
enjoy.
that I don't know. Like I literally would argue that nature's not supposed to stay the same. It's always been fluid. It's always been changing. And we as humans, we do have this fixation on keeping things the way we like them and trying to control those changes and mitigate changes. And, it's almost like we've seen a precedent for it and this is how it should be, but actually
Mm.
nature's always changed. Things have always hybridized, and that's how new species have interwoven. But it's not just grizzly bears and polar bears. Beluga whales also, I believe, have hybridized, but I think you have
they?
yeah.
With what?
Narwhals apparently.
Belugas and narwhal? No way.
They're both very closely related.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do they have a...
Well, not all narwhals have a tusk anyway. It's mostly the males that have the tusk. Some two, some one. And the tusk is just such a crazy, crazy adaptation anyway. Have you ever had toothache?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you've had a hole in your tooth, you've got a filling in it, right? So that toothache is because your nerve's exposed, right? Well, narwhals are one of the few creatures that don't just have one nerve exposed, they have 10 million nerves completely exposed at all times because that tusk is a tooth. It's one very long tooth. And unlike any other creature, they have these direct holes that go directly to their nerves, to their brain. And of course, that's wild. They're living in really, really cold water anyway, which, I mean, if you've ever had a hole in your tooth and you drink cold water or hot things, it hurts. So to imagine having 10 million of those holes exposed at all times, it was obviously a question that's super interesting to dentists. Enter two Harvard dentists that went out and they caught a narwhal and they put it temporarily, the narwhal was not harmed. They temporarily housed it on the back of the boat in a tank and they put a big...
I just love this idea of like two dentists being like, should we go get a narwhal?
I need to
It's
know
like,
why.
Is it that simple? Surely not. Getting a tank. Let's just get a tank on the back of an icebreaker. Let's go.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they did it. And they put, they basically put a big sack around its tooth, and they pumped in lots of different types of water. And they found that when they pumped
Sounds
in,
awful.
well, they had a heart rate monitor and electrodes on the narwhal's head.
Yeah.
And when they pumped in really, really salty water, it meant the heart was like,
Yeah,
and
I'm surprised.
the electrodes are going
sensory
off.
tool.
Well, it's a sensitive tool, but why?
No, a sensory tool.
Yeah.
I don't think it's got to be beyond that. not
Yeah,
just
but
a-
if you think about it, right, when you have ice formed, it leaves behind the salt, right? Because ice is fresh water.
Yeah.
It's not salty water, it's fresh water. So when the iceberg forms, that means the water around the ice is more concentrated in salt. So one of the theories is that tooth, if you will, if they're holding their breath and they're swimming around and they're foraging and then they're coming up to the surface, like I was saying to you, Steve, my worst fear is like you go ice dive and you can't find the surface again. Well, these guys, they start coming up and they find it super, super salty. They know then that there's loads of icebergs. So maybe that's like an extra adrenaline rush, fright or fight, where it's like, quick, gotta go, gotta find that hole in the ice. But we still don't know. There's so much about a narwhal we don't know.
If I can just backtrack a bit, because I'm not sure that everyone is actually going to know what a narwhal is like. And I'm discovering that quite a few people think that they are a myth, that they're not a real thing,
Really?
that the unicorn of
Unicorns.
the sea is just something that we imagined. And when you start looking at what a narwhal's like, I mean, they are kind of an absurd creature.
weird.
One of my favourite facts about them is that the name narwhal comes from an Old Norse word meaning the corpse whale, because their skin looks like decaying human cadavers, and it kind of does. It's got this sort of mottled colour all over it. They are very closely related to the belugas in a group called the monocots, I think, which is referring to their teeth. And as you said, the males, predominantly the ones that have that enormous tusk. But yeah, what that tusk is used for is a really intriguing one, because all the things you said are true, but if they are true, why have only the blokes got them? Because when you have things like that, that the male only has as his, his defining characteristic, normally it's used as a way of showing off for the girls, right? It's a way of battling other males, and they are sometimes seen fencing with them, not in a really kind of like intense, full-on rapier sort of way, but in an almost tactile kind of way. Maybe it's both. Maybe it's a bit of all of those things. Who knows?
I reckon it's a multitude of functions. There was this really interesting behaviour where this narwhal was seen kind of like thrusting it through the water and putting this shoal of fish kind of into
I've
a
seen
state
that.
of kind of
The
shock.
drone.
And then it would just like, the whole then pod would then go in and start sweeping up all these fish. So as a tool, yes. As a sensory tool, I could totally see that as well. And to your point, I wonder if kind of that measuring of salinity is, is a perfect tool for hunting, to try and find out where food is, where the ideal environment is. The other one, obviously, is about breaking through ice, right? Which is, and I'm not saying that's a plausible theory. I'm just saying that was a theory.
It's clearly the Arctic Swiss Army knife.
Yeah, I think so.
Talking about big teeth that can be used to get through the ice, and definitely can, I would like to blow your mind with walrus.
Oh, go on. Yes,
Oh,
please.
come on.
Walrus are obviously incredible. We've had them rocking up on British shores in recent years. This giant kind of seal with big rubbery lips and bristles all over it, and these huge tusks that they can use to carve through the ice. They can use to drag themselves out of the ice, out of the water and onto the ice. But what I want to share with you is something that I hope is going to blow your mind, like it did mine when I heard it for the first time out in the wild off the coast of Alaska. And it is a walrus sound that I am going to play to you. And I'm very much hoping that you react
I'm excited.
to in the same way that I did. Have a little listen to this.
I'm going to shut my eyes.
Sounds like a wolf.
No, it sounds like a bell.
Oh yeah, like a glockenspiel or something.
How is that a walrus?
God, if you heard
Play
that
it again,
and you
play
had
it again.
no reference, you'd think they were aliens or something, wouldn't you?
That's a walrus?
Yeah. So the first time I heard this, I was filming on an island off the coast of Alaska, which has this massive haul out of male walrus that rock up at a certain time of year to rest. They are gigantic. They're several tons in weight. They turn pink like a sausage when they come on land to get rid of all the heat from their bodies. Absolutely comedy-looking animals. And we were camping on this island while we were filming them. And the weather came in and we got stuck in our tents, and you lie awake in your tent at night and all you hear is this chiming sound of the walrus as they swim past you. And it is the least kind of connected to an animal sound you could ever hear. It sounds exactly like someone chiming a bell, and it resonates for miles. It's being made underwater, but you can hear it in the air. And it just doesn't fit. It doesn't fit the animal.
Not right. It's very electronic.
Yeah, exactly.
How do they do this?
They have air sacs in the throat that they use to resonate the sound. Not 100% sure what they're using it for, because, like I said, it's just about all males on the island. But yeah, I mean, maybe it's a flex as they're swimming along.
That is a blinking
Get
flex.
a look at
Being
my
a bell.
sacs.
They have quite complex vocalizations, though, don't they?
So a lot. They're one of the most vocal pinnipeds or seal species, possibly the most.
The most.
So they've got lots of things that are much more like what you'd expect.
Yeah.
Bellows and growls and coughs and barks.
Grunts, yeah.
But that chiming sound, magical.
Unbelievable.
My other favourite thing about walrus, have you ever been to the Horniman Museum?
Is this about the baculum?
To the
It's
what?
not.
The what
Okay,
museum?
never mind.
We can come back to that in a second.
Okay.
What museum are we
Lizzie's
talking about?
obsession with penises here just springs into light for the first time. The
every ep.
Horniman Museum in London has a walrus specimen that famously was brought to them before they really knew what walrus were like, and it was brought just as the skin, and the taxidermy was done by someone who'd never seen a walrus before, and they overstuffed it,
Oh, brilliant.
and it is genius. It
Oh, I
is this
love it.
massive bratwurst of an animal with its eyes popping out of its head. It is, sorry to everyone at the Horniman, but it's still the best reason to go to the museum. It's absolutely wicked.
Bad taxidermy is just like the best wormhole, isn't it, to go down?
Yeah,
Have you
and
seen
I
them?
wasn't going to talk about it. But we have got to go baculum just for a second.
Baculums. Penis bones, essentially, is what a baculum is.
That is the bite-sized chunk that we should have for social
Bite size,
media.
bite size, maybe
Bite-size.
not the
If
word
you've
we should
seen-
go for,
If
Sarah.
you've seen a walrus baculum, I'm not sure it's bite size. No, I think they're just quite interesting looking things, aren't they?
I'm just waiting for you to carry on. Just
I don't
Steve?
dig
talk.
your own hole for yourself, Lizzie.
Maybe I should just move on quickly, unless you have any baculum stories.
Oh
'cause-
yeah, no, absolutely. So, the
Of course he
the
does.
penis bone is actually amongst mammals relatively common. In fact, it's kind of weird that we haven't got one.
We're the only mammal that doesn't have a penis.
Not the only mammal.
the
but
few?
we could be the only primate potentially.
Let me look it up quickly.
You have
carry
a
on.
little Google of that, and
Yeah.
while you're doing that, I will extemporize about the walrus penis bone. The baculum of the walrus is the biggest in the natural world. It's incredibly dense bone.
How big?
So
Well, think of
the
a
biggest,
walrus size.
Well, and for anyone that
Relative
can't
to
see your
like that.
hands, what we talking?
So
2
so
foot?
it's kind of about just over half a meter in length. The bone is much denser than the kind of bone that you would have in one of your normal long bones, to an extent where the baculum, also known as an os in some parts of the Arctic,
Mm.
is used as a club. And there is an apocryphal tale that a lot of bars up within the Arctic Circle, the bartender will keep a walrus cock bone behind the bar. So if anyone gets out of order, they can thrash
Smash
them
them with
with a bony wanger.
I love
Oh my God,
that.
that's brilliant. Of course, elephants. They don't have a baculum. You've seen an elephant's penis wanging around. Some marsupials, monotremes, some ungulates. Anyway, let's move on from
Oh,
baculums.
yeah,
Can we
let's
come
move
into
it
a
on
penis
that
episode
quickly.
at some point? Because
We
I have a
have
feeling this
to.
is a rich vein of
We
thought. I'm
have
getting a
to.
thumbs up from the crew back there.
We have to.
Episode 1, we have already dropped into the animal gutter and we intend to stay there.
Oh gosh. It's interesting you talk about the sounds of the Arctic. I just want to quickly mention a shoot that I was on last year. Actually, it was up in a place called Barrow, locally known to the community that live there as Ukluvik. And have you been? Oh my gosh.
Mm.
Okay, so it's just this wonderful place, isn't it? Very, in terms of polar bears, they're just literally roaming around. It's nothing like Churchill. Um, it feels what I would describe as like full Arctic wilderness. You know, you're just like walking around. There's bowhead whale bones everywhere, and of course, at the right time of year, well, in winter, it completely freezes over. And so there's a group of scientists that go out there, including one incredible scientist, Kate Stafford. She does lots of acoustic monitoring and she deploys these hydrophones throughout the year and has done for decades to understand how the sound of these underwater landscapes are changing. And you talk about those amazing chimes of walrus, but she started to discover more and more kind of, I guess, non-subarctic and Arctic specialists like orca pushing up and overlapping, as well as all the anthropogenic noise and things like that. So the noise of the Arctic and actually underwater is quite diverse and not what you imagine when you think of, I guess, a cold, barren landscape.
So talk us through why orca are more and more heading into Arctic waters and why they're becoming a problem.
Yeah, so it's unfortunate simply down to changing marine environments. We've got sea ice loss and they're able to literally access areas which before they wouldn't. And unfortunately for Arctic specialists, the bowhead whales, which I don't know how effective they'd be at hunting bowheads. You'd probably be
No,
able to.
they do. We didn't see it ourselves, but the local people
Okay.
we were with actually showed us the skeleton of a bowhead that had been hunted by orca the year before.
Incredible, yeah. And so they have this availability to species like narwhal, which never had that kind of presence of these predators before. And so that's going to create, again, new changes, to the belugas, the narwhals, the bowheads.
It is probably one of the reasons why narwhal and beluga are how they are. We've talked about animals evolving to live in the niche of an Arctic environment. Well, narwhal and beluga have evolved to live within the
Yeah.
leads inside the pack ice, protected by this shield of ice that's been there since, for hundreds of thousands of years, since the Pleistocene. And now it's breaking up earlier in the spring, it's forming later in the autumn, and it's giving an opportunity for orca to penetrate into the ice and take on these animals that just have absolutely no defense against them.
You never know, they might be good at jousting.
That is entirely a possibility.
Okay, I just want to quickly talk about belugas as well, because I've also spent a bit of time in the Hudson Bay. And as you say, they're so unique. They're described as the canaries of the sea. And their vocalizations are so complex. And, just listening to the walrus earlier made me think about being out there last year where there was like 50,000 plus of them that come into the Hudson Bay to have their young, to play, to socialize, to belly rub on the rocks. It's just like an extraordinary place when they're all there. And actually I was listening out to the vocalizations, which you could hear standing from shore when you're filming them, by the way. And some beluga actually mimic the sound of vessel horns and some of the bells. So sometimes now and again, you'll just like hear this kind of really odd sound in these vocalizations of these beluga. It's just phenomenal.
So beluga, like for size, do they just look similar to narwhals but without the big tooth at the front?
And white or pale yellow in colour. They kind of look a little bit like a swimming stripped banana.
Totally. Yeah.
One of the really intriguing things about them is that they don't have fused neck vertebrae as most whales and dolphins do. So they can move their head around. They can kind of look around, look to the side, look behind them. And the melon at the top of the head that they use for presumably amplifying the sounds that Lizzie's talking about is also movable. So they can move this lump on the top of their head. They're one of the most curious and weird creatures out there. I filmed them further north, way up in Somerset Island, and we went up into the high Arctic to film beluga, and the pack ice was completely frozen over for miles in every direction, and we waited for days and nothing happened. And then one evening there was a tiny crack formed in the pack ice. We went to bed. The next morning we got up, a lead had opened, and about 600 beluga had swum into the bay in front of us.
Wow.
And the bay is knee deep, and they've come in there because the water flowing off the land is at 3 degrees or 4 degrees, freezing cold to us, but to belugas who are living in seas that are minus 1.8
Yeah.
because of the salt content, it's like a spa. So they come into these waters where it's comparatively warm, and they grind their bodies on the shallow underside of the pebbly bay and get rid of, slough off all of their kind of grubby skin that they need to get rid of, that's covered in parasites and lice and things. And you can be standing on the shore so close that you could just reach out and rub your hand down the flanks of dozens of belugas right up close to you. It is quite something.
They are really special. You asked how big they are, Sarah. They're from 3 to 5 meters, would you say? How much smaller are they compared to narwhals? I've never actually seen a
Very,
narwhal.
very similar in size. Very
Really?
similar
Are they?
in size.
I would have said a bit smaller. Okay.
But
I've got an idea in my head of what a narwhal.
one of the craziest things is that polar bears will catch them.
Yeah.
So in the exact situation that I've been talking about, where they've come into shallow water, polar bears will leap on their backs, savage, take down, and then haul out of the water a beluga whale that's probably going to weigh a ton.
Yeah.
Which blows my mind.
It does. But after spending time in Hudson Bay, so when we were there, it was 30 degrees Celsius. And okay, we're in the summer months, but I was in a t-shirt and there was a polar bear that was just, as you say, trying to cool down. It kind of sprawled out in the fireweed, just hoping to keep cool. And you can imagine, because of the proximity of these beluga to the polar bear, 10, 15 meters from the shore, you can totally imagine seeing that thing happen. Just how often these belugas are pushing in right next to the shore. It's pretty amazing.
Well, we're talking so much about how important it is having this cold climate. I am going to dig into some science, some new science right now, because obviously we all know about global warming, we know about climate change, we know that we are doing lots of things about it, but more recently there has been a bit of funding, 56.8 million from the UK public sector, which has gone into advanced research and innovation in terms of climate change. Now, I don't know if any of you guys ever saw a headline about dimming the sun. Yeah, I think that was a great eye catcher, but I don't think that's doing justice to what this actually is. So technically, there may come a point where we reach a tipping point when we talk about climate change, right? We absolutely need to remove carbon from the air so that we can protect our frozen planet. But in the meantime, there's scientists that are like, well, worst case scenario, everything's projected. It's showing that we might not reach that before we get a tipping point and something like the day after tomorrow happens. We unforeseen big catastrophic changes all happening at once. We don't know what that might look like. So there's scientists that have made the argument that why don't we just, hedge our bets and worst case scenario, maybe start trialing out a few different things to see, if we can buy ourselves some more time if we don't take enough carbon out the atmosphere in time. So it's, again, controversial, but really interestingly, especially because we've been talking so much about the ice flow, there's 4 different areas that they're looking at where this funding is going. One of them is to increase the Earth's surface of reflectivity. So looking at our ice flows, they're looking at regrowing the ice sheets.
Do you know what really just bugs me about this?
Go on.
It's like, if we spent, sorry, not to go on an absolute rant, but this really kind of
Rant
is
away.
a bit
Yeah,
infuriating.
I'm with you. I'm 100%
It's
with
like
you.
if we spent that 48 however much million pounds on actually protecting the environments that halt the albedo effect and the runaway impact of having sea ice loss and all the rest of it, then we wouldn't bloody be in this situation.
It's a distraction. It's all a distraction, isn't it?
It's a distraction.
It's all people going, look, it's all right. Look over here. Look, I've got a really cool bit of technology. That'll solve it. That'll sort it. And then forgetting about the stuff the thing, having just spent 3 weeks in the Arctic, is that, you meet local people who differ in opinions about what global warming will mean for them, or how it's going to affect them, or even where it's come from. But there is nobody that doubts that global warming's happening, because you can see it. It's not like something that's in a newspaper, or it's some statistics or facts. They can look around their valley and go, well, there was a hanging glacier there 10 years ago and that's gone. This big glacier here, that's retracted a mile in the last few decades. We have fish turning up in our seas that we don't even know what they are. We have bugs turning up in the summer that we don't have names for. Our entire calendar is based around these cyclical events that aren't even happening as they should do and have done for thousands of years. And then you look at there's a kind of an idea that not all scientists agree on whether climate change is happening. That is not true.
Yeah.
Scientists absolutely 100% concur that climate change is happening. There's something like between 3 and 0.1% of scientists who doubt that it's down to us. That's it. The most mental scientists are the ones who think that maybe we're not causing it. Nobody thinks it's not happening. No one.
And just on that, it's interesting you mentioned that, because what I hear time and time again is that the reason it's part of a natural cycle is that it's in Earth's larger cycles beyond just us, right? So they're naturally, the ice age, and then kind of big changes on our planet, which are beyond our time.
We talk about it as climate change, but then anthropomorphic caused climate change. So the climate has always been changing. Nature's
That's
a bit
exactly
fluid.
it. Yeah.
But anthropomorphically, because of the way we use our planet, we've obviously escalated things to a very vast and quickening pace that a lot of animals can't keep up with. I just want to close before we close, because I know this gets.
What you mean? You don't want to end our first podcast
I
on
know,
our planet is dying and there's nothing we can do about it. Strong feeling, Sarah.
So no, look, there were 4 different things that they looked at, including marine cloud brightening, stratospheric aerosol injections. They all sound super scary. Yeah, but the one thing that I thought, well, actually, that kind of makes sense is this regrowing of the ice sheets, because it sounds so simple, but it's all down to a paper that was in 2017, which essentially was like, ultimately, all we need to do is pump more water on top of the ice sheets, and then in winter it will
Sarah,
freeze.
I can't.
So what happens is,
am I in another universe right now?
Well, the way that ice forms, the way that these ice sheets are formed is over a very, very long period of time with snow that is compressed and compressed and compressed, and it takes a long time. But if you were to just take the water and put it on the top, and then over winter that could freeze, then technically speaking, we may be able to thicken those sheets, which would be great news for narwhals, great news for polar bears. I don't know. I'm kind of intrigued by it. I'd love to sort of go and see it for myself, but the thing that it would affect massively, because it involves floating a lot of wind-powered pumps that would take the water from under the ice onto the top.
Let's just pour a bit of water on a glacier.
I'm going to say there's already a trial going on in Svalbard, and they're looking at a sort of 1 kilometre square area to just see if it works. But these are just worst case scenarios.
It would be wicked for our PR if we were to finish our first podcast with an actual fight.
Okay.
The guys back there are putting their thumbs up as well.
But seriously, let's all go around then. Sarah, do you genuinely think this is a good strategy to help our planet?
I think
answer.
My honest answer is that I just don't think that we're necessarily going to do the things that are needed quick enough. And this is some funding that sounds like a lot, but in terms of the amount of money floating around that's needed to fix these things, it's not that much money. And if there is a chance that this could buy a little bit more time in the worst case scenario, then I don't think it's a bad thing. There's so many safety checks in it, like protocols. A lot of it's just checking things on a computer. But if it doesn't pass this entire safety protocol, they can't even trial it. I don't know. I just think, what's the worst that can happen? We don't have this, and then we carry on the way we're doing, and we keep moaning that we're not doing enough, but then we don't do enough, and then the day after tomorrow happens, and we could thicken the ice, but we didn't want to. I don't know. I just think it's worst case scenario.
I'm with you on this, Lizzie. If I was a climate skeptic oil billionaire, then I would be promoting stuff like this, because it leaves John Q. Public to think, it's all right, the boffins have got this. I
Yeah.
don't have to change how I do things. And I think it is these developments are important, but they are essentially a distraction from what we need to do. And when you're up in the Arctic that is warming, depending on which study you go to, at least twice, potentially 4 times faster than the rest of the planet, all of a sudden it is so real. It's so real.
Yeah.
There are people who are saying, well, 3-4 years ago, I would still be out on the ice fishing for Arctic char well through into middle of July. But now it's kind of May and the ice is not safe to go out on anymore. And I know it's going to be like that from here on in. And it is changing. It's changing so that you can see it.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that we lack here. It's so difficult to tell the stories.
That's the problem, though. Is like we are so privileged in this room to be able to go and see firsthand all of these changes. We've experienced more than your average person's ever going to see firsthand. So we're so passionate about it, and we're so like, we need to. But I mean, look, you can't change a system overnight. This is not. It's not a solution. It's literally testing for buying a bit of time. And even the scientists involved in it are like, it's not a solution. But we're not trusting that the government and anyone else is actually doing this. It's I don't know. It's like catch-22. We're just in a mess, aren't we?
So that we don't depress the hell out of everyone who is thinking about pressing subscribe, but is now not going to do that because of how depressing we've just been. Can I finish off with getting deliberately hypothermic for science?
Please.
Yeah.
Is that all right? Because I've done it. I've done it twice. The first time when I went down to Antarctica for the first time, and there is a University Portsmouth that have their own science department which totally focuses on extremes and what they do to the human body. And they put you in a tub with a thermometer up your body. It is chilled to about 11 degrees, which is not ferocious, but if it was any colder than that, then it would be dangerous.
As in a chamber, in air or in water?
In a pool. So you sit in this pool, and for the first 10-15 minutes, you're like, oh, it's pretty cold this, but it's all right, I'm doing okay. After about half an hour, you start to shiver, and you shiver to such an extent that for 3 or 4 days afterwards, you have full-on DOMS in your muscles. You're exhausted.
Oh.
It gets to the stage where it is painful to shiver. After about 45 minutes or so, that starts to stop as your body starts to properly shut down. And after about an hour, they take you out. At that point, your core temperature measured by the body thermometer has probably dropped no more than a degree, maybe a degree and a half. And they put you into a bath of hot water. And after about 15-20 minutes in the hot water, you're like, oh, I'm fine now. I feel great. This is absolutely amazing. And you go to get out and they say, sit back down. If you get out now, you're in big trouble, because your core temperature has dropped by 2.5 degrees, by 3 degrees to a dangerous level, because all the blood has gone out from your core back out to your skin and to your extremities. It's the most incredible experience.
Painful.
Really painful, really full on. And
Will you do it again?
I have done it again.
He's done it twice.
He just does it on a weekend.
I mean,
I love to suffer for science.
I
Me.
know, I'm not
you
surprised.
do have so many stories of like mind-blowing suffering that you've like gone through intentionally.
He just loves it.
I can't wait
It's
for the
deep,
next
actual.
episode where we
We go into another
done.
near-death
It
experience.
does kind of sound like I'm some kind of fantasist, doesn't it? Like I've got
getting to the
Munchausen
bottom of
syndrome
it.
and I'm just basically just trying to convince everyone that I'm in trouble and they should come and help me.
Speaking of that is all we've got time for today. You'll have a Q&A episode dropping on Friday, which is super exciting. So remember to send your questions to questions@that'sjustwild.com and we'll get to it.
We are a brand new show, so any support is really, really welcome. And you can follow us on your favourite podcast app. Leave us a review. It makes all the difference. Unless it's bad, of course, then just keep it to yourself. So as for ad-free listening, our newsletter, special deep dive episodes, and members-only benefits, you can subscribe to us at that'sjustwild.com. That's that'sjustwild.com. We're also on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and you can find us at That's Just Wild Pod.
We're everywhere, aren't we?
We
Right,
are
that's it.
like a virus.
Or a
Brilliant.
parasite.
Right, thanks for listening. See you next week.